Hello and welcome to the Collapse Life podcast. I'm your host, Zara Sethna. Today, we're talking about waking up to the realization that what you once thought was true is not necessarily all it's cracked up to be. It's a feeling many of us have shared in recent years, and not least our guest today, Alexander Pohl. Alexander is a former London banker and a management consultant, and he worked for years financing big wind projects and solar farms, and he was genuinely convinced he was making the world a better place. And he's here to tell us what happened next. So, Alexander, a very warm welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be part of such a project.
Thanks. Thank you. So, we're going to start talking a little bit about this idea of awakening. And you and I have somewhat similar stories in the sense that, like you, I was once an idealist and I wanted to make a difference. And I chose a path of working for big NGOs and UN agencies. And once I started doing that, I realized things inside the system were not quite what I thought when I was outside the system. And I know you had a somewhat similar experience when you worked with HSBC and KPMG. So I just wanted to start with, tell us a little bit about your background and how you got started working with companies like that and what happened.
Well, it's probably best to give a little bit of context about my upbringing, because that's one of the contributing factors that I think actually helped me awaken or realize what is probably going on. So you can probably hear from my accent, I'm a bit of a global mutt. I was born in Germany. I was raised in a German household in the Midwest of the US in Iowa. When I was about 13 or 14, I spent a year abroad, came back to Iowa, and then left the US to finish my schooling, my German military service, and then university in Europe. I actually I did an engineering degree at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland, spent a year in Australia, spent some time in the Caribbean, and I traveled to South America and other places. So I have a little bit of a global lens on the world. And also because I spent a little bit of time in different places, I didn't really get so indoctrinated. My father was a Second World War veteran. The US, the Midwest of the US, is a very wholesome and lovely place to grow up. And then when I graduated from university, I had all the ambition that someone from that type of a background would have. I thought I would have lots of opportunities building things as an engineer, but for whatever reason, the world of engineering rejected me, and I ended up going into the world of commerce and banking and finance, which at that time, the UK was one of the few places where you could actually do that. So I went into KPMG as a management trainee, which meant I had no focus. So it again meant that I could float around and try different things, getting different perspectives. And that's really part of how I could connect the dots that I connected 20 years later, after 20 years of banking and finance and sustainability, and led me to where I am today. So going into KPMG, one of the biggest companies in the world, responsible for auditing endless household names, I was quite starstruck. And as part of my training, I ended up in a department called Sustainability Advisory Services. It was kind of a dream for me. And I was rubbing shoulders with CEOs and big companies, helping them with their sustainability programs, supposedly. At that time, I knew no better. It was the early days of carbon accounting and climate change. The IPCC was just getting off the ground, and I had colleagues who were going to the global meetings, helping write these reports that I now look at, decades later with shock and horror of, today there was the headline that we're going to hit 3% and we're all 3 degrees climate change, global warming, and we're all going to die. However, knowing the financial manipulation and frauds and the vast volumes of money that were being mobilized even 20 years ago, and then being exploited, embezzled, mismanaged. It should have been an eye opener back then, but I was naive. When you put on the suit, you're putting on a mask in certain respects. You get to be part of what you think is an elite club, and you think that if you can make saving the world financially relevant, there's no harm making money while you're making the world a better place.
Right.
That carried on through my time at KPMG and then followed at HSBC. And I look at the headlines now, and HSBC is at the forefront of green squawk, let's call it. These are big companies making grandiose, it's almost like the grandiose narcissists of the corporate world, this ego about how great they are when actually they're manipulating and doing exactly the opposite of what they're saying. So I spent 15 years at HSBC, and I saw all manner of things. Again, often I thought I was doing the right thing, but I think everyone, irrespective of where we are in the world and the jobs that we have and the salaries that we have, we reach a certain point where things just are so out of place that no amount of money will, motivate us to continue down that path. And I reached that a couple of times, questioned things, and then finally was expelled. I was laid off. I was on a list. I was asked to leave. And
was that because you asked questions?
To be perfectly honest, I don't know. But what I do know is, of course, there are always rationalization programs where you end up on a spreadsheet. It's a little bit of a black box. But when I was on that spreadsheet and I received my letter, I had a board member sponsor. So we're talking about one of the top 30 people within HSBC vouching for me, standing behind me, and they still made me leave. So it was very clear that my time was up. Right. I might say that it was actually the universe doing me a favor, because if I would not have been asked to leave at that time, I wouldn't have ended up in Sweden. I wouldn't have ended up uncovering what is probably a $3 or $4 billion fraud, and also becoming instrumental in helping spread the message of the paradoxes that we are presented on a daily basis, and that if your gut tells you something's not right, you can trust your gut, trust your heart, and realize that actually our minds have been corrupted, and it takes our hearts really to help us override this, brainwashing, programming, endless indoctrination.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we move into this new awakening that you're experiencing, just want to stay a little bit on this sort of, you talked about fraud, manipulation, corruption with KPMG and HSBC. What did that look like? What were you seeing?
So if you go back, if I go back in time, back to KPMG, one of the key things is, in this world that we live in, you need credibility. In the scientific world, we have peer-reviewed papers. In the financial world, you have financial audits. You have a third-party company coming in and auditing you and telling the world, your investors, your shareholders, your stakeholders, your customers, that you are financially sound. And the truth is that often you're not. Often there's a manipulation at play. And I regularly saw audits, and I did financial audits, where actually someone should be saying something. The company, the accounts don't add up. They were doing financial engineering, etc. But it wasn't. So, it was a clear indication that these audit firms are participating in fraud. It's financial fraud in the simplest of terms. Within the finance community, within the climate community, these early days of climate change and the IPCC, they had something called the Clean Development Mechanism. And any of your viewers can look this up. This was the early days of carbon credits. There were projects where people were financially incentivized to do more than they would have normally. That was the intention anyway. But actually, in the end, lots of companies and lots of projects that would have happened anyway got billions of dollars. And Oxfam did a study on it. They said it was $100 billion fraud. So $100 billion fraud 20 years ago, you can imagine what the scale of that would have been today. And of course, we're seeing it now, because the replication of that is all of the green finance initiatives that are being launched by the new Green Deal. You might have heard the terms like that. In the US, it's the Inflation Something Act. Billions and trillions of public money are being funneled towards projects. And this was already 20 years ago. And that really opened my eyes. At the bank, it was people doing dishonorable things, nepotism. I sat in a meeting which I got heavily reprimanded for, where one of the heads of the bank, he's the CEO of the UK bank, he asked us to lend money to one of his friends. And I was a little naive. I raised my hand and I said, well, this thing that you want us to lend money to, it doesn't make financial sense. So I don't think we should support it. Another senior member of the bank phoned me up after that call, reprimanded me for raising, that point. The deals were done. Several of the companies that were financed went bankrupt, right? No heads rolled. No one was fired. And you kept seeing this happen over and over again. And it became clear that no one cared about the actual financial transactions or loans themselves. It was just the bonuses, the salaries, I guess you'd say the nepotism of helping each other out. Right. And the money often disappeared. This is a common theme that we're seeing everywhere. And in modern day, the COVID stimulus money, the vaccine money, there are billions and trillions of dollars that have just disappeared, or better said, have been reallocated or reproportioned. The renewable energy and the green transition is that on steroids. And I'm seeing it here in Sweden. And I already saw it, 10, 15 years ago.
Right. You lay all of this out in a documentary film that you made called Headwind 21. So you were working in these organizations, you had enough, and they, it seems, have had enough of you, rabble rousing. So you decided to make a big shift in your life, and that's how you ended up in Sweden, where you are now. So tell us a little bit about that journey and then what happened.
So that journey also began quite innocently. I think many people, when they reach middle age, and I'm in my late 40s now, and they have children, they reflect on their life, and they do have a dream of something better, a career change, a slower pace. And I was no different. I had tried to go to the south of France, to the countryside in England, but unsuccessful. Then one day I thought, I'll try once again. And I happened to find a little place in the north of Sweden. I looked at the world. I did an analysis of politics, climate, etc. And I ended up in Sweden. Sweden had, in my view, a utopian sort of feel to it. I mean, in all the Hollywood films and TV shows, you've always got these nice but dim Scandinavians. And I just thought it sounded like a great place. Good weather. They love nature, supposedly. Great style, IKEA, etc. So I managed to find a house in the north of Sweden for about $10,000. 3-bedroom house. I mean, many people in the corporate world spend $10,000 on a week's vacation, or your elite corporate people spend that on a weekend. So I bought a house in the north of Sweden in a small village in the middle of the forest, and thought I had found my Eden, my utopia. Everything was fine. It was very natural, quaint, countryside people. But after about 6 or 7 months, I became aware of a wind farm. And my documentary really documents the early days of finding a wind farm, thinking this is a bit strange, it's not a terribly windy place, and then going into the depths. And it turned out that I was probably the last person they expected to move in next door. And rather than a NIMBY, I became what I call a NIAMBY, not in anyone's backyard.
Right.
And it turned out that I had uncovered a General Electric massive fraud. They were launching a giant turbine that didn't work. But as part of this green fraud, there was endless money. And so I started to dig, and it led me through the Swedish courts, through the Swedish political system, NGOs, the United Nations, how corporates work, law firms, banks, the collusion, and in a way, a conspiracy. These people are conspiring together to do illegal, immoral, and destructive things. And Headwind is, that film was just a stroke of luck, because the documentarian I worked with, Marijn Poels, who is an incredible documentarian, I can only recommend his films enough as a mechanism by which people can tell a story. You have to tell yourself a story before you realize it's reality. And working with Marijn, we were able to go beyond my wildest imagination. I mean, we interviewed Greta Thunberg. Who would have thought in a million years that we would get to interview her? We ended up interviewing celebrities and other individuals who work for organizations that are instrumental in the global fraud that we're seeing being led. Well, it's being publicly led by the World Economic Forum and the United Nations, but privately it leads you into elite families that have been active for, hundreds of years. And I thought at first it was too complicated or far-fetched to be true, but time and time again, I realized that there was truth to it. And Headwind is a great tool for many people, especially if you're not familiar with the green fraud. Wind turbines are the most visible and arguably the most promoted form of renewable energy. And they are so easy. It is so easy to recognize the paradoxes. They're supposed to save nature, but they destroy it. They are supposed to make reliable electricity, but they don't. They're supposed to work, and actually the engineering has reached a scale where they don't work anymore. So they don't save carbon, they don't make reliable electricity, they're defective, and the maintenance and the deterioration of these things is off the charts. They pollute the environment, and they're being built in pristine forests, rainforests, farmlands. They can be coated with Teflon and PFAS, if anyone has seen Dark Waters. Everything that would be environmentally protecting or economically beneficial, they don't do. Yet, time and time again, you see a politician stand up and blatantly lie. You see industry representatives and companies stand up and blatantly lie. And of course, you see the press in lockstep with all of these liars and actually go down the route. And I've spoken to fact checkers, various newspapers like The Guardian, the Financial Times, Bloomberg, and others, and they are all in lockstep. So it is fascinating to see such a concerted effort to promote a technology that only really benefits machines. And I think, when we look at collapsed life, it is literally a collapse of, what we would say is the biological living world in favor of some sinister, dystopian technological world. So it's really quite, I recommend the film to everyone. Of course I would, it's my own film, but actually Marijn's entire suite of films, starting from The Uncertainty Is Settled, which is the first kind of film in his modern series, through to the most modern one, which is called The Primordial Code. Highly recommend those as a journey of enlightenment and knowledge to help people actually get a grasp on reality. which
Right.
is at first depressing and sinister, but at the end, it is so exciting. And that's where I am now.
So is that what motivated you? I mean, because obviously you moved up to the north of Sweden knowing what you already knew of the manipulation and the financial incentives and the fraud as you laid out. So you see this wind farm going up in your neighborhood, essentially. You already know. I mean, you could have rolled your eyes and looked the other way and said, I'm just going to enjoy my little slice of heaven. But you decided instead, I'm going to take this on. I'm going to tell the story. I'm going to make other people aware of it. Is that what motivated you?
Well, to tell you the truth, I think I was not actually cognizant of the extent of the devastation. So, that lots of people are doing these big wind farms to make money. I kind of understood that, but I didn't actually understand how fraudulent they were.
Okay.
I had worked on wind farms. Yes, of course, they were questionable in certain respects, but no one questioned the sustainability of them to the degree that I ended up having to do here. I didn't look into bribery and corruption. So when it came up, I was a little bit shocked because of the scale. It was the largest wind farm in the world at the time. And the fact that it wasn't windy here. So why would you build one of the biggest wind farms in the world in the middle of a pristine forest environment where it's not windy? And then on top of that, I have always had a little bit of a moral compass. I must admit that I lost it at certain points in my life, but I never could tolerate people doing unethical and immoral things. And especially when I came to know the local people, these aren't worldly people in general. These are just good, wholesome people who have spent most of their life here in the forest. And then to have suited and booted venture capitalists and private equity billionaires from Paris and London and other places come and prey on them, lie to their faces, that pushed me over a threshold. And then I really just said, I just have to stand up for these people. And the local people were either too fatigued or in on it. If you have relatively modest living, it's a hard life here because lots of the industries have left. There aren't terribly too many jobs and people often just get by. If someone comes splashing cash, often you will turn and look the other way. So people were either fatigued, they were in on it, or they just didn't have capacity and just needed to get on their lives. So there was really no one who was standing up with my skill set. So I stood up and really dug my heels in. I managed to find one of the only lawyers in the whole country who wasn't already on the take. And we went through a process of court cases, all of which I lost, but sometimes you need to lose to prove a point. And the point that was proved was that the whole system was corrupt, from the local regulators who give the permits, through to the local municipalities who have to say yay or nay, through to the courts, through to the police, through to the politicians. It was a crazy ride, but one that just validated to me that something is really wrong with the world at the moment, and it takes action. So I did plenty of YouTube, so plenty of Facebook campaigns and posts and LinkedIn posts. They're all well and good for your intellectual titillation, but actually, unless you're doing things in the real world, taking action, nothing's really going to change. And I think that's part of their plan. Part of the plan is to just keep us distracted with pointless social media exercises. And they're really scared of us actually getting on in the real world and taking action.
And not just distracted, but I think they want to keep us scared. And I think you had the courage to stand up and you actually took a number of steps and they tried to make an example of you, didn't they?
Yes. I mean, it's hilarious because I'm probably also the last person that that they should have done that with, because I have the knowledge and the network to be able to make something out of it that works against them. So not to spoil the film, but there's a scene at the end of the film where I get into some trouble with the police, and that entire scenario highlighted how totalitarian countries have become. And actually, if you speak out against the narrative, they are legalizing the use of totalitarian force. And at that time, I was held supposedly under the COVID regulations restricting how people could gather. That was sort of their bogus charge against me. But in Sweden and many other countries, if you do anything, so say a police officer punches you in the face, or in my case, abducts you, if you resist in any way, shape, or form, legitimate or not, you're committing a crime by resisting, a public official. And it was crazy to see how that, how these tools are developing over time. And since that incident, which was 2 years ago, Sweden has introduced sweeping and absolutely crazy laws under the guise of fighting terrorism, which enables the government to hold people for a prolonged period of time if they are under the suspicion that they may create a disruption or criticize the government in the wrong way. And it's crazy. I'm currently trying to follow this through with something called the Raoul Wallenberg Institute, which is a supposedly world-leading human rights and humanitarian NGO, which is linked to the Wallenberg family, which turns out to be one of the most interestingly sinister families in the world that no one has ever heard about. Because, of course, as I came to learn, that Sweden is a powerhouse when it comes to clandestine and hidden hand influence around the world. But that experience, I have had so many people say that it was a staged abduction. So I will give the spoiler that in the film I get abducted by the police, but I will leave it to the viewers who haven't seen it to see how that plays out, and also the entire process that followed it. Because, at the moment I am still under threat from that experience.
It's amazing. So, I mean, it seems surprising. As someone who watched this film and had a similar view as you of from the outside what Sweden and Swedish society is like, that just sort of blew the lid off of it. That when a country wants to, those powers, that impulse to have totalitarian control is there no matter what. And just like a company could greenwash their intentions and make it look like they're doing things that are good for the environment when really they aren't. It almost seems like this is a government form of greenwashing, almost, to sort of put an image out there that we're a kind, egalitarian society, but when push comes to shove, not so much, right?
And that's something that I think people need to... Oh, sorry.
You go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and that's something that I think is really important that people recognize. I've been looking into psychology a little bit and attachment styles. I'm having some relationship challenges. Not surprising in the challenging world that we're in and the work that I do. But there's something called attachment styles. And these attachment styles, they look back at your parents. They're about childhood trauma. And one of the defense mechanisms that we have to cope is that we reject the shame that our caretaker or our parent could harm us or could wound us. And I think those similar psychological traits are in play in society today, where people cannot accept or recognize that their caretaker, the state, the government, is supposed to be our societal caretaker or a governance provider, that they could actually be causing us harm. And we feel like an inherent shame, many of us probably, because we vote, even though I'm learning much about the fact that abstaining from the vote can sometimes be the best option. So not participating in the fake democracy that we have in play in many countries. But I think that's a really important point, is that we need to reflect, and we have to overcome the psychological defense mechanisms, the cognitive dissonance that even I had before. And I keep having cognitive dissonance. I don't want to believe that the truth is the truth. But I flipped it on its head and I find it invigorating to learn more. I'm not afraid of it anymore.
Right. And I think that there's an impulse too that you think, oh, well, this country is not living up to my expectations. Maybe I'll move. I'll go somewhere else. And you just described you've already tried that. You've lived in a number of different countries, and many of us have. And so how do you see your alternatives at this point? Are you thinking, okay, Sweden is not what I wanted, and so I'm going to go somewhere else? Or do you just sort of dig in and say, I'm going to just build my own defense mechanisms, a framework that I can live within? I mean, I think that's a question that many of us need to figure out. I wondered what you thought.
I think that's a great question. And I think it's a very personal question that really depends on everyone's personal circumstances and where they are. So for me, I've had this conversation because, as I said, I'm having some relationship strife. There are some thoughts around family and, where to live and so forth. But for me, I've come to the conclusion that wherever you are unless you are under immediate threat, is probably the best place for you to be. A place where you're familiar, where you have some assets, maybe a house, etc. And that you need to switch into this mode of living your best life. You need to really find a way to enjoy every day and what you're doing, because that's your defense mechanism. I made a quote in another film where I said, they're getting scared of happy people because, they want us to live in a perpetual state of fear. Mm-hmm. Fear is easy to, it keeps us down, it keeps us weak, and it makes us easy to control. If we are living fulfilled, meaningful, community-based lives where we get up every morning looking forward to the challenges that come our way rather than fearing the next thing that might come our way, that is a magical, I think anyway, that's a magical place to be. And for me, that's Sweden. I've looked at many other countries. I thought Costa Rica sort of looks really good. But then when you learn that Costa Rica is another model country for many different reasons, and you've got some very high profile global elite based or coming out of Costa Rica, you realize Costa Rica is no better than Sweden. You've got the US, many of the states in the US might feel better a little bit more than the other, but then you can always see the same global fingerprints of this conspiracy, collusion, whatever you want to call it, that permeates into every school, every city council, every corporate, every company. It's almost in every person's, every average Joe's brain stamped somehow. So I don't think you can escape it. I think you can just change your perspective and your paradigm. And I sometimes treat life now like an escape room or a Sudoku or an infinitely complex puzzle. And the game is to decrypt, to figure out what's going on and to make a complete picture. And personally, the more I learn, the less I know, but the more excited I get, because the potential of what is going on, and we are at the end of an era. It is the end of maybe not the Anthropocene, but it is the end of life as we know it. But what comes next has so many different possibilities, all of which could be the plot of the most incredible science fiction thriller film. And we're in it, and I don't think we're non-player characters. There's a movie I use as an example. It's called Free Guy. It's Ryan Reynolds. It's a trashy Hollywood flick from, I think, maybe 1 or 2 years ago, about a guy who's in a computer game. And he's one of these non-player characters that are not controlled by a person playing the video game, but he becomes sentient, and he suddenly realizes that he can influence the video game, and that gives him incredible power. At the moment, I'm not 100% sure if I can influence the plot of this movie, because I uncovered a $3 billion fraud of being committed by General Electric. General Electric is about to split into two. It has massive share price implications. I approached the SEC. I approached Harry Papadopoulos. He's like a very famous forensic accountant who uncovered the Madoff Ponzi scheme. I approached Jim, what is his name? Chandos. He has a famous hedge fund in New York, and he shorted GE massively and lost. No one will respond. So it's almost as if the computer says, look, I'm really proud of you that you figured out all of these details. Same thing with my court cases. I've been in touch with the United Nations, but no one responds. It's a very standard approach. I approach someone, they say, oh, that's super interesting. I give them the details. They say either they don't respond at all, or they say no. And it's not I made a career of the value-added no. So if you say no to someone, it's always good to give them a little bit of advice or something of value with that no, because you close one door and you open another. But no one opens any doors for me. No one. It's really crazy. So so I think that's my perspective now, is I'm trying to live my best life. I changed my career to become sort of a self-sufficient farmer, but I'm not quite there yet. Being a farmer in society is one of the least respected professions, but actually it's the most challenging and rewarding professions. You have to be a genius. So farmers are geniuses. And then I train to sort of help people reconnect with themselves internally and the natural world outside of us. Because I've come to the conclusion that if you're not connected with yourself and sort of make peace with your demons, work out your traumas, become a stronger and more resilient and more positive version of yourself, you're in big trouble, because whatever is out there will break you down and is often psychological. And also you need to reconnect to nature, because whatever is going on here has something to do with nature, the natural world, possibly spiritualism. If you believe in everything in the world is energy, and energy can be influenced, there's some very exciting realms of growth and learning in the spiritual realm. And you, of course, need to look to nature, because all your basic needs are met by nature. Food, shelter, water, comfort, love, etc. And they're trying to synthetically replace that with machines. And machines always come with a price tag, a patent, an on-off button, and they're trying to shepherd us towards that. And although I don't reject technology, I mean, we're using technology now. It's kind of the E.F. Schumacher approach of appropriate technology rather than technology for technology's sake. And so I'm also trying to live a lower and more appropriate technology life, which is really, really liberating.
In terms of, your connection with nature, you're an environmentalist, or you may not use that term anymore, but you're certainly someone who loves and honors nature and would do anything to protect it. But you've gone, as we were talking about this, on this journey of awakening from the narrative around climate change and global warming to the kind of simple, in tune with nature life that you live now. I just want to talk a little bit about that narrative, because you know now so much about, from your own experience, about what's built into that. Why do you think that there's such a focus on carbon dioxide reduction and that the idea of these renewable energy sources, which are built on, just as you said, fraudulent claims. And is there a better way? Is there a way for us to have cleaner, greener energy sources?
Very good questions, and I grapple with them every day, and I revisit them because today's answer might not be consistent with tomorrow's answer. It's very fascinating because I grew up in the US in a German family, but with a little bit of religion, and religion is a big thing around the world. It turns out that it's probably more a control structure, an indoctrination tool than actually something that is of substance. But I came to the realization that there seems to be a bit of a war on life. And if you're a biblical person, it's Luciferian or satanic. Lucifer, Satan's mission is to destroy God's creation, and many people who are so to say awake have been drawing lots of parallels with what you can read in the Bible and Revelations. And I personally sometimes can see those parallels, even though I've looked very deeply into the Catholic Church and various religions around the world, including Judaism, Lutheranism, and various sort of Eastern religions. And there are some very disturbing sort of indoctrination tools within them. I often liken the Catholic religion in its purest form to a very cunning eugenics program. And the reason I say that is because if you look at the history of the Catholic Church, all priests are celibate. Even though there are very disturbing and increasingly frequent stories of sodomy and various very creepy and disgusting, sexual debauchery stories. But if you go back through time, it was always an honor to have your eldest son, your strongest, most intelligent, to be educated by the church and then to go into the clergy to become celibate. So if you can think about a eugenics program, that celibate, firstborn, strongest, most intelligent son, he does not have any progeny. And it's the younger, the weaker, perhaps the more, the ones who were not as honored within the family. So, they're weaker from also character and personality. They were told, you're not allowed to practice any type of family planning or whatnot, and they would have many children. And over time, and we're talking about centuries, you could actually stupefy society through the use of the Catholic religion. Very crazy. And also then when you look at some of the other religions, there's always this war, there's always a separation, where we're talking about Islam versus Christianity, the Jewish faith, etc. It's always separation. You can only be Jewish if your mother was Jewish and your bloodline is Jewish. So, again, it's not open to everyone. Islam, we will not rest until every single infidel in the world has been converted to Islam. These religions don't really resonate with this nature connection feeling that I've gotten. And for me, that's very important, because actually if you don't incorporate an element of spirituality with regards to your relationship with nature, you do go back to this environmentalism. So you are right. I don't really use environmentalism anymore, even though it's a convenient label that many people can associate with. I'm something different. And I've been doing a lot of work around spirituality and energy and mysticism. And it's fascinating to see how many of those concepts are now playing out. We're trying to see technology try to read people's minds. We're seeing computer programs try to forecast the future. We're seeing lots of technology be used for health purposes, trying to get, to induce delta, theta, gamma brain waves, for example. So it's a really really fascinating when you can see what you can do in the natural world. So our human potential, of which it said we're only using 3 to 4% of our human potential, versus what they're trying to synthetically replace with technology. So we never reach that human potential. So we're kept weak. So I do feel that I've evolved from environmentalism, and I have been doing a lot of work trying to unpick for myself, how do I fit in with regards to the relationship with nature? I mean, I'm now clearly of the position that I am a subset of nature. Nature is probably an organism. So this planet is probably an organism. If you look at fractals, it's just another order of magnitude bigger than the human body. The human body is just a colony. It's not, it's a coordinated unit, lots of cells. Each cell is like a human being equivalent unit. And we have billions of them working in concert to create a magical vessel that is then inhabited by maybe a soul. If you take that up to society and to the planet, it's not too far-fetched to recognize us as a piece of a bigger organism. And that organism is competing in certain respects with this synthetic construct. And I encourage your listeners to look up a guy called Rudolf Kjellin. Rudolf Kjellin is he's not very well published, but he is the inspiration for Hitler and his Mein Kampf. So Hitler was not the originator of these horrible and despicable concepts. He was merely, I guess you'd say, the messenger. The actual originators, many of them sit within Sweden. And Rudolf Kjellin came up with the concept called geopolitics. You might hear that term in the news. It's being misused, but it's being normalized. Geopolitics is the state as an organism. So it's a very fascinating concept that started in the late 1880s. It then was fed through National Socialism. Actually, Sweden is arguably a national socialist state. There's a very strong public-private partnership, which is one of the fundamentals of fascism. There is careful control of the media, punishment of the dissidents. Sweden is essentially not the utopia. It is the antitopia. It is the model country for the New World Order. It is an authoritarian National Socialist state. And Rudolf Kjellin actually coined the term National Socialism some 40 or 50 years before it was ever used in Germany. So Germany is that entire narrative around our recent history, and our recent history, I'll go back, say, 150, 200 years, is very different from what I was taught at school. And it was only through this awakening process that I could re-educate myself or de-educate myself, de-indoctrinate myself. So my relationship has definitely changed. And this, not that I would do anything for nature, but as I am nature, all the work that I do, defending, raising awareness, reempowering, is really self-preservation. I preserve life, but also it's somehow a recognition that there is something like a disease. Something is out of balance. This is the poor use of technology, or the over-reliance on technology, really. So it's about, I love E.F. Schumacher's book, and I don't know if you've read it, but I recommend it to everyone. It's called Small is Beautiful. Okay. It's E.F. Schumacher, an economist from the UK, written in the 70s. Basically, the principle is economics if humans and nature mattered. And it is, I would argue, maybe a framework that would deliver a utopian life, the appropriate use of technology where technology enhances our ability to create, to be beautiful, because we're not supposed to be consumers. Humans are supposed to be creators. If you think about how we work, our imagination, our creativity, 8 billion people creating rather than consuming would be beautiful. And some people say 20 billion. The planet would more than sustain 20 billion if we were all creators rather than consumers. So I think that's also part of the core concept of how to make more with less. And when it comes to energy, I mean, that's a very fascinating space because we don't need electricity, right? Electricity is not a necessity. It's a luxury. You know, warmth is a necessity. We need to be warm because when it's cold, we can only heat ourselves so much. I'm a Wim Hof instructor, so it's incredible how powerful the cold is and how the body can warm itself. But when it's minus 20 out, you need warmth.
Right.
Nature already provides all of the energy sources for warmth. You know, we've got wood and biomass, which can be burned sustainably to provide sufficient warmth for a human being. Then if you look at that, then we do need some electricity. And there are innumerous ways that could be produced. And we have more than enough capacity to do that. So, you know, we have everything from small scale hydro. We have, you know, I'm not against small scale use of oil or coal. You know, the problem that we have is that we're using such vast amounts that, you know, the production of energy by modern means is always going to have an environmental impact. Even if you have a hydro dam, you have to impact the local ecosystem. You have to build things. Wind, same thing. Even small scale wind. If we go back to you know, the U.S., the Wild West, you know, we had wind used to mechanically pump water or to run a mill. There is an environmental impact to that. That's why wind is so crazy. You know, we're worried about climate change, but where does a wind turbine get its energy? It gets its energy from the wind. So it's causing direct climate change because it's removing energy from the climate system. So it destabilizes, changes rainfall, but it's supposed to make the climate more stable. So a bit of a long-winded explanation, but really it's about using electricity and energy appropriately, revisiting some of the potentially sandbagged technologies that already exist. And, you know, there is a lot of work, and I'm not saying Nikola Tesla necessarily, those types of technologies, but certainly there are many stories. I heard one from France involving Total. I know one from Sweden where a guy was murdered in Thailand. These were people who had technologies where a car could run off of water, right? So we have clean technology solutions in drawers of corporate entities across the world that have been sandbagged. We need to go back. We need to reinvigorate those. And I guarantee you that there is more than enough electricity to run our lights, to run our refrigeration, to run our computers. But it will also enable us to eradicate and just cancel and quit the unsustainable use of energy, the wastage. You know, if you look at an electric car, I hate to tell anyone who has an electric car, you are driving death. You know, it represents everything that is wrong with consumption. You know, it's not efficient. It's devastating. It's wasteful. You know, I'm not saying we need to go back to riding horses or everyone needs to get on a bicycle and walking, because I do think that, but we have plenty of technologies that enable us to be efficient and appropriate. And we need to do more of that. You know, less of this pointless, pointless travel. You know, if you want to go see your mother, your sister, your brother, discover new things by flying to Australia, I would argue that's what technology is there for, to create amazing experiences. Technology is not there for Vegas. You know, Vegas, for me, embodies another example of, if you got rid of Vegas, no one would be any worse off. Arguably, many of the technologies in modern companies are based on addiction and dependence. And, you know, Vegas is all about addiction, dependence, exploitation of human weakness. I mean, I went to Vegas. It's great to see. It is an experience, but it is an awful place for many more reasons than it is a good place. And again, I think that everyone needs to reflect on their own life and their spheres of influence and rationalize to an appropriate level, and then see how they can inspire others throughout their network to do something similar. Because I think once I have people coming here to Sweden, for example, I run retreats. I have people from all around Europe coming. I had some people from London living a very, let's call it, matrix lifestyle. They spent a weekend here and they were so inspired that they took back aspects and then made it relevant to themselves and their life, and they made an improvement. And it was inspiring for me. It was inspiring for them. And arguably it was a 0.1% improvement in the global situation. If you do enough of those, the problems will be fixed faster than we can imagine.
I think it's a really important point to make as well, because not everybody can move from London to the north of Sweden. Not everybody can find a piece of property that's affordable like you, but it doesn't have to be. That's one way that people can make a shift in their lives. But there are also just smaller steps along the way that people can take. And so I think that's a really important point to make.
Without a doubt, everyone has to make their own best life. And I always say what you need to do is you need to reflect, you need to look forward, and then you need to transform. And, you know, each of those three steps are really important because you have to look at the relevance within your own life. A big challenge for me is I think most people have big mortgages, and mortgages and debt are one of the tools, the amazing, cunning tools that they have developed to enslave people and keep them down. Because if you have to worry about your $100,000 or $200,000 mortgage or euro mortgage, you know, it doesn't give you the same flexibility that you would have if you were lucky enough to be debt free. And so I do recommend to most people, if they can at all, to get themselves as one of their key steps to get themselves off the debt drug. And then to look, as you said, small steps, finding joy. You know, I recommend people to go outside and touch nature, you know, just hug a tree. You know, the steps you can take are so small, but also, of course, educate yourself, find joy in knowledge, share knowledge, speak, sit down with other people and discuss not only the fun stuff, the football game, whatever, you know, again, distractions they have created for us, but explore knowledge and difficult concepts, you know, revisit history, and ask yourself, does it make sense? You know, there's a lot of things that we can do to bring back the best of the past with the knowledge of the present. And that's really what I'm sort of encouraging people to do. We don't want to go back and live in caves. That argument is always a gaslighting trick that they try to use. We're trying to bring the best of the spirit of the past with the knowledge of the present to live our best life now, and then to create that positive change and transformation to get us to the utopia. Is it the second coming of Christ? I don't know. Is it Eden? Is it the remaking of the earth? Who knows? But I do know that if I take those steps, I create an environment that I can thrive in. And the more they throw at me, you know, and there are lots of stories about 24, 25, 26, 27 being 4 crazy years. You know, we don't even know what's coming. AI becoming sentient, the rise of Skynet. Who knows? The crash of our economies, a third world war. Who knows what's coming? But it doesn't matter, because if you have those principles in that environment and that mindset, it just gets more exciting and more empowering, rather than more full of fear, making you weak, sick, mentally ill, and ultimately doing what they want. My personal view is that this is a war on life, and happiness and joy and human experience. And the more you can do what they're trying to undo, the better it is, and the more you can get at them. Because sometimes it feels like you can't really get at them. These are trillionaires, and you're sometimes scrounging around to pay your rent. But actually, the butterfly effect and quantum concepts mean that every human being, irrespective of whether you're the janitor, a homeless person, a rock star, everyone has the equal potential to make a positive impact in the world. And once you take that, everyone's a superhero. We're 4% of our human potential. Well, imagine if you got to 5. Everyone can change the world. Well, yeah, we're all superheroes.
I think that perfectly sums up the whole ethos of Collapse Life. Take steps now for whatever may come, and maybe nothing will come, but you will have made better changes in your life anyway. So thank you so much, Alexander. I think you really brought a lot to this, and I hope you'll come back so we can talk a little bit more and update us on and all the things that are going on in your life.
Yeah, that's great. And of course, it would be a shame if I didn't take the opportunity for a shameless self plug.
Please.
But if
Yes.
anyone is inspired from what they've heard here, they're always welcome to come here to the north of Sweden, to sit down over a beverage, a glass of wine, a cup of coffee, to discuss these topics. And of course, also, I of course run courses where I try to share my experiences and share some of these tips, tricks, tools, etc. And they're more than welcome to come and experience that as well.
How can people find you? How can they learn more about what you do?
So the easiest thing to do is either to look me up on just by Googling Wim Hof Alexander Pohl, or they can come to our website directly at behumannatural.com. And that, of course, embodies sort of the concepts. And as said, I've been there where many people may be, or where they started. And I'm partway through my journey. Some of the people may be further ahead, but certainly I think we all share common principles and values. And by coming together, we just help each other get those little pieces of the puzzle that we don't have, the inspiration that we might be missing. And ultimately, we're going to be creating new experiences that we take through with us wherever we're going.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure talking to you today.
Pleasure was mine as well. Thanks so much.
Thank you. So friends, that was an amazing and eye-opening chat with Alexander Pohl. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll be posting more content just like this on Rumble and YouTube every week. So please check us out on those channels and like, subscribe, share, and comment. That really helps us to expand our audience and reach more smart viewers like you. Make sure you also follow us on Substack, because we have new stories coming out there every week at collapselife.substack.com. And we're also on Twitter at collapse_life. Our passion for telling stories and interviewing interesting people is fueled by viewers and readers like you. We really, really appreciate your support. So thank you. Please subscribe. We've dubbed Collapse Life the thinking person's guide to society and demise. It's about opening eyes, taking control, and taking action in our own lives. And Alexander just gave us some great tools to do that. We look forward to bringing more engaging, intelligent voices like his, and we can't wait to see you on the next podcast. Until then, always remember to keep your chin up. It's only collapse. See you soon.